Okay, so let's get the ball rolling. I want you to just, for a second, if you can, imagine the world of global diplomacy. I mean, really picture it. Close your eyes, if you're not driving. What's the first thing that actually comes to mind?
Oh, that's easy for me. I immediately picture these huge, gleaming mahogany tables that probably cost more than my house.
Right.
And I see a lot of very expensive but somehow still ill-fitting suits. And mostly I just hear this endless drone of statements that are so carefully and painstakingly designed to say absolutely nothing at all.
That's it. It's the art of the filibuster, isn't it? It's the art of using 1,000 words to avoid a simple yes or no.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all just endless group chats. It's zero accountability. And it's jargon that, it would put you to sleep faster than a warm glass of milk.
Yeah.
But today, we are diving into something very, very different.
Oh, it's a completely different animal. We're looking at what you might call a rupture in the timeline of how nations talk to each other.
A rupture. I like that. We're looking at a figure who basically decided that the old rule book, the one full of polite, vague, let's circle back to this diplomatic speak, that it belonged in an industrial-grade shredder. We're talking, of course, about Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, India's external affairs minister.
A man who, according to this fascinating stack of sources we're digging into today, effectively turned international relations into something like a roast battle.
I love that, a roast battle. And one of our sources has this description I just can't get out of my head. It describes him not just as a diplomat, but as and I'm quoting here, destroyer of poorly framed questions.
Chuckles.
He calls him the class topper. The kid in the front row who always has his hand up and says exactly what everyone else in the room is thinking.
But he does it with better grammar.
Much better grammar, a much sharper suit, and this almost terrifying level of calm.
And that's a really crucial distinction we have to make right at the top. This isn't just about being brash or loud. Anyone can be rude. That's easy. Right.
This is about precision. It's surgical. And the sources we're looking at, they frame this as a retrospective. The date is set as February 16th, 2026. So we're sort of looking back from a near future at a few years of what we could call the Jaishankar era of communication.
2026. Yeah, it really does feel like we're looking back at a shift in the tectonic plates of how countries communicate. And the source makes this fantastic point. Usually, politicians give press conferences. You know the drill.
Oh.
A reporter asks some kind of gotcha question, the politician dodges and weaves, and everyone goes home bored and nothing's really been said. But Jaishankar...
he doesn't do press conferences.
No.
According to this, he drops trailers.
Trailers. I just love that concept. It completely changes the frame.
It really does. It implies a sense of anticipation, doesn't it? It implies there's a narrative, a story. Like you're not just tuning in for, the boring details on policy or trade tariffs.
You're tuning in for the performance. And so our mission for this deep dive is to walk through what the source material calls the greatest hits of Jaishankar's verbal takedowns.
The diplomatic roast.
Precisely. But we need to go deeper than just, laughing at the one-liners. We really need to analyze why this specific brand of roasting became a genuine, effective geopolitical tool.
That's the key.
Because this isn't just about being funny on Twitter or getting likes on Instagram Reels. This is about how a rising power communicates its boundaries, its red lines, in an incredibly chaotic world.
Right. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm not really into Indian politics or, I don't follow the nuances of South Asian foreign policy, I'd say stick with us.
Please do.
Because this isn't really just about India. This is a masterclass in how to handle a room, how to shut down hypocrisy, and fundamentally, how to use brevity as a weapon.
It's like assertiveness training on global scale. It's about how to say no clearly and firmly when some of the most powerful people in the world really, really want you to say yes.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's jump into the first section. And I think we have to start with the moment that really put this style on the map, at least for the Western audience. The source calls it the European reality check.
Yes. The Geopolitical 2022 Forum in Bratislava, a classic.
Can you set the scene for us? Because I think the vibe in the room is so important to understand just how explosive this line was.
Absolutely. So you have to transport yourself back to mid-2022. The conflict in Ukraine is absolutely dominating every single headline. It is the only thing anyone in these circles is talking about.
It's all-consuming.
Completely. And Europe is in what our source wonderfully describes as peak moral superpower mode.
Yeah.
The narrative coming out of every European capital, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, was very much, this is a global catastrophe, this is a battle for civilization itself, and everyone, everywhere must drop everything to align with us now.
There was this assumption of automatic solidarity, right? This idea that you are either with us or you are on the wrong side of history.
Exactly. It was a very binary worldview. And into this incredibly charged atmosphere walks Jaishankar. He sits down on the stage, he's flanked by European moderators, and the air is thick with expectation.
And the expectation is for a defensive answer, surely. They expect him to apologize or to equivocate or to offer some, vague platitudes about world peace.
That's what the script called for. Instead, he waits for the question about India's stance. He looks the moderator dead in the eye, and he delivers this line. He says, Europe has to get out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
So that's
Don't silence
But
him.
can you just visualize that room? The source says you could almost hear 27 EU ambassadors collectively spill their espresso.
It's a hilarious image, but it's really profound. That single sentence, the source calls it the ricochet effect. It traveled across the internet instantly because it articulated a frustration that so much of the global south, Asia, Africa, Latin America, had been feeling for decades, if not centuries.
It's the double standard, right? That's what he's hitting on.
That's the core of it.
Right.
He is challenging Eurocentrism. But, and this is key, he's not doing it with anger. He's not pounding the table like some revolutionary.
Well,
He's just holding up a mirror with cold, hard logic. He's calmly saying, look, when things go wrong in Afghanistan or Myanmar or Sudan, Europe tends to say, oh, that's very complex, or it's a regional issue we must monitor.
we'll send a fact-finding mission.
Right, we'll form a committee.
Yeah.
But when bad things happen in Europe's backyard, Europe declares it a global moral imperative for all of humanity. He just pointed out that discrepancy.
He completely stripped away the moral high ground. It's like he democratized the very concept of what constitutes a crisis.
That's a great way to put it. He forced them, in that moment, to confront the idea that their pain isn't inherently more valuable than anyone else's pain. And that is a very, very uncomfortable realization for a continent that has, for the better part of 300 years, been the center of geopolitical gravity.
And it didn't stop there. This is where it gets really interesting for me, because he then transitions from that high-level philosophy right down to hard data. Let's talk about the oil math lesson.
Ah, yes. This was during the Washington 2+2 dialogue.
Another really tense moment.
Very tense. The setting is Washington, D.C., the press corps is there, and the air is thick with criticism directed at India for purchasing Russian oil, despite the Western sanctions regime. The narrative being pushed was that India was, in effect, funding the war machine.
And the standard diplomatic response would be something like, well, we have to consider our energy security needs, and we're reviewing all our options. You know, the usual blah, blah, blah.
The usual word salad. Jaishankar, instead, went straight for the data. He didn't make an excuse. He made a comparison. He pointed out very calmly that India's total monthly purchase of Russian oil was less than what Europe consumes in a single afternoon.
An afternoon. I mean, that is a mic drop statistic if I ever heard one. It's just devastating.
It completely killed the argument stone dead right there in the room. The source describes this moment so beautifully. It says it was less a rebuttal and more a verbal PowerPoint slide, complete with invisible bar charts popping up behind him.
Yes. And the translation is just so clear. Please check your own receipts before you come asking to see ours.
Exactly. And look at how it changes the power dynamic of the entire conversation. Suddenly, it's not India justifying its actions to the West.
No.
The West is forced silently to justify its own massive consumption. He turns the moral spotlight around a full 180 degrees just by using one simple, verifiable piece of data.
It's so effective because it's irrefutable math. You can argue about morality all day long. You can debate political alignments, but you just can't argue with the number of barrels of oil.
And that's a recurring theme in his style. He doesn't often deal in vague sentiments or emotional appeals. He deals in specific, often uncomfortable facts. He acts like an auditor who just walked in and found a massive discrepancy in the books.
Speaking of uncomfortable facts, let's pivot from Europe and the U.S. to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
We absolutely have to talk about how he handles Pakistan.
Right, because this is a very different dynamic. With Europe, it's more about exposing hypocrisy on a global stage. With Pakistan, it's about refusing to even accept the premise of the conversation from the get-go.
So the source highlights this one incredible moment, and it compares it to the Wendy's meme, which I just think is perfect.
The Wendy's moment, yes.
So set this one up for us.
Okay, so a Pakistani journalist tries what is apparently a classic maneuver. He asks the Indian foreign minister about the problem of terrorism in South Asia. But he frames the question in a way that implies India is somehow part of the problem, or that terrorism is this vague, foggy, regional issue that both sides are sort of equally responsible for fixing.
Ah, the both sides track.
Mm.
We all have our problems with violence, don't we?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Exactly that. And Jaishankar's retort is just breathtakingly direct. He says, "You're asking the wrong minister. It is the ministers of Pakistan who will tell you how long Pakistan intends to practice terrorism."
Brutal. Just, you're asking the wrong minister.
And the source compares this to that internet meme, "Sir, this is a Wendy's."
Those Wendy's. And for anyone listening who maybe doesn't spend their entire life on Twitter, which is probably a very healthy choice, can you explain the meme?
Of course. The meme essentially means you are totally confused about where you are and who you are talking to. Your grievance, your question, your entire premise has no place here. You've come to the wrong counter.
So by saying you're asking the wrong minister, he is performing a kind of diplomatic boundary setting. He's saying, my job title is Minister for External Affairs. I deal with foreign policy. If you want to know about the production and export of terrorism, you need to go talk to the people who run that as a state-sponsored industry.
He's not just hinting. He is explicitly labeling terrorism as the state policy of the other side. It's a complete and total rejection of that both sides narrative. He refuses to share the blame, or even engage with the idea that the blame is shareable.
And he builds on this with what the source calls the definition defense. He has another quote that's just as sharp. He says, a terrorist is a terrorist in any language.
This is so significant because in the world of international relations, there's often this cynical game played with definitions. You hear it all the time. Oh, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right. Or countries will hide behind these technicalities. Oh, that group is a non-state actor, or that's just a political agitator.
It's all about creating ambiguity to avoid taking action. And our source notes that in a world that treats definitions like optional software updates, Jaishankar insists on installing clarity.
Installing clarity. I like that.
He refuses to let the language become slippery or vague. He's essentially standing up and saying, we all know what this is. Let's stop playing games and pretending we don't.
It's like he's the only one in the room who actually read the dictionary before showing up to the meeting.
Or maybe the one who wrote it.
Okay, so let's move across the ocean now to the United States. Because you might think, all right, he's tough on adversaries like Pakistan. He's tough on old colonial powers like those in Europe. But surely he goes a bit easier on a major strategic partner like the U.S.
And you would be very, very wrong.
Very wrong. Let's talk about Senators and Soros. First up, the Lindsey Graham encounter at the Munich Security Conference.
Right. Munich is basically the Super Bowl of defense policy. It's always very serious, very formal, very Atlanticist in its focus. And Senator Lindsey Graham, who is known for being, let's say, quite vocal and opinionated.
That's a diplomatic way of putting it.
He raises concerns about the situation in Kashmir, and he frames it using this concept of two democracies needing to work things out.
Which on the surface sounds like a fairly benign comment, right?
Yeah.
Hey, you guys are both democracies. You should just be able to talk it out.
On the surface, yes. But the trap is the implication. The implication is that the situation is still unresolved, or that there's a kind of moral parity that requires some third-party advice. It implies that India needs America's help, or maybe specifically Lindsey Graham's help, to manage its own internal affairs.
And what does Jaishankar say?
He says, very calmly, do not worry, Senator. One democracy will settle it, and you know which one.
Oof. The source gives us this incredible visual here. It says that somewhere in the Bavarian Alps, a snowcap melted out of respect.
It's just so smooth. One democracy will settle it. What he's saying is, we've got this. We are a sovereign nation, and we do not need your advice or your mediation.
But he does it so politely. He asserts sovereignty without being rude. He addresses him as senator. He's respectful, but the message itself is absolute steel. This is our internal matter, and we are perfectly capable of handling it. It's the most polite way of saying mind your own business that I think I've ever heard.
It's a masterclass in it.
But my absolute favorite moment in this entire section, maybe in this whole deep dive, is what the source calls the impossible choice.
Ah, the dinner party question, a classic journalistic trap.
A total trap. So if someone asks him, as a hypothetical, who he would rather have dinner with, North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, or the billionaire philanthropist George Soros.
Okay, let's just pause for a second and appreciate the sheer malice of that question. That is a massive, massive trap.
It's a no-win scenario.
No win. If he says Kim Jong-un, the headlines the next day are, Indian minister cozies up to brutal dictator. If he says George Soros, who has been incredibly critical of the Indian government, the headlines read, Jaishankar validates Soros's critique. There is no correct answer.
And most politicians would just fumble this. They'd get defensive, or they'd say, I decline to answer hypotheticals, which just makes them look boring and evasive.
But Jaishankar's reply is just, it's from another planet. He thinks for a second and says, I think this is Navratri and I'm fasting.
Absolute genius. I think this is Navratri and I'm fasting.
The source calls this cultural jujitsu.
Explain that. Why is that jujitsu specifically?
Because in jujitsu, you use your opponent's weight and momentum against them. Here, he uses the weight of the political trap against the questioner. He doesn't say, I refuse. He doesn't get angry. He invokes a personal, cultural, religious observance, the Hindu festival of Navratri, where many people fast.
So it makes the question itself completely irrelevant.
Completely. It effectively says, your silly little political game is meaningless to me right now because my culture and my faith preclude me from even participating. He sidesteps the trap by grounding himself in his own identity.
The source says the question itself reconsidered its life choices.
And it probably should have. It just shows a quickness of wit that is so rare. He's thinking on his feet, but he's also rooting his response in who he is, an Indian observing a religious festival. It plays incredibly well back home in India, and it leaves the international audience just sort of chuckling because it's so damn clever.
Speaking of things that play to both home and international audiences, there was also the incident around the criticism of the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act. A U.S. ambassador had some pretty critical things to say.
Right, and this is a very sensitive domestic policy issue for India. Usually, foreign ministers get extremely prickly when any outsider comments on laws passed by their own parliament.
You'd expect a very formal, stern response. A diplomatic protest, maybe.
But Jaishankar's response, delivered in Hindi, was, let him come here. Pyar se samha dench.
Which translates to what, exactly?
It translates to, we'll explain it lovingly.
Oh, lovingly. That is not what I expected.
No, but the source analysis here is absolutely key. It says this should be translated as lovingly but firmly, possibly with charts.
Laughs. Possibly with charts. The source calls this understated steel.
That's it exactly. The phrase pyar se, or with love, in this particular context, is almost patronizing. It's like what a patient teacher says to a student who just cannot grasp the lesson. Come here, sit down. I will explain it to you slowly so you finally understand.
So it implies the critic is operating from a place of ignorance, not malice.
Precisely. And that he, Jaishankar, is benevolent enough to take the time to correct their misunderstanding. It completely infantilizes the criticism. It takes all the sting out of the attack by treating the attacker like a confused child who just needs a good tutor.
Okay, let's move on to Section 4. We're heading to the big house now, the United Nations. This section is called the UN Smackdown.
The UN. A place where, as they say, diplomatic patience often goes to die. It's incredibly bureaucratic, it's famously slow, and everyone loves the sound of their own voice.
And the source describes a particularly heated atmosphere during a debate. Apparently, a UN official gets a bit loud, a bit aggressive while discussing veto power. Voice raised, tempers flaring, which is pretty rare in those hallowed, very quiet halls.
Very rare. And Jaishankar just cuts right through all the noise. He doesn't shout back. He doesn't raise his voice to match. He drops the volume of the entire room, he says very directly. Keep your voice low. You are a UN official, not a king.
You are not a king. Oof. In a diplomatic setting, that has to be just a devastating line.
Absolutely devastating. The source says the room went from a heated multilateral exchange to something like a library after hours in about 0.7 seconds.
It's what the source calls the volume control technique. When someone raises their voice to try and dominate a space, and you respond by calmly telling them to lower it, you immediately seize the status of the adult in the room.
And the source has another great metaphor here. It calls it the diplomatic equivalent of adjusting someone's microphone and their ego at the exact same time.
Perfect.
Because it also points out a fundamental bureaucratic reality. You are an official. You are a civil servant of the international community. You don't have royal prerogative. You don't have a crown. It reminds everyone in that room of their actual place in the hierarchy.
So it's really about behavior, isn't it? It's almost like he's enforcing etiquette.
But it's weaponized etiquette. It's a sharp reminder that the United Nations exists to serve the sovereign nations that are its members, not the other way around.
I want to talk about China now. This is section 5, the China conundrum. Because the relationship between India and China, I mean, it's big, it's messy, it's complicated.
It's arguably the defining relationship of the entire region, maybe the world, for the 21st century.
Yeah.
And it is fraught with tension border disputes, economic competition, strategic rivalry.
And usually when diplomats talk about it, they use these very complex, jargon-filled phrases like a challenging, multidimensional engagement or an evolving strategic fluidity.
Right, all designed to obscure rather than clarify.
But Jaishankar's summary.
Our relationship isn't normal.
4 words. That's it. Our relationship isn't normal.
No theatrics.
No shouting, no big speech.
Yo, it's the geopolitical version of changing your Facebook status to it's complicated, but, with nuclear weapons involved.
It's just so stark. What's the effect of a statement like that?
It's incredibly powerful. By refusing to normalize the relationship verbally, he signals that business cannot proceed as usual. He is saying that until the major issues, like the border disputes, are resolved peacefully and respectfully, nothing can be considered normal. It prevents the other side from just pretending everything is fine while tensions continue to simmer.
It sets a very clear precondition.
Exactly. And then there's this other moment, the one the source calls the alphabet mystery.
This one feels a bit more abstract, a bit more philosophical.
It is. The source says he was being pressed repeatedly by a journalist about a specific A issue regarding China. We can assume A stands for a specific border point, or maybe aggression or alignment.
The specific A almost doesn't matter, does it? It's the persistence of the questioner trying to pin him down on this one single point, point A.
Right. And after being asked again and again, his deadpan response is just, and what is beyond A?
And what is beyond A?
It just left hanging in the air.
The source calls this a philosophical coffin, like a Zen riddle.
It's brilliant because it completely disarms the questioner. It implies that the journalist is stuck on the very beginning of the alphabet while he, Jaishankar, is thinking about the entire strategic landscape from A to Z. It suggests a scope of thinking that goes way beyond the immediate tactical A issue.
The imagery from the source here is just hilarious. It says you could just picture a think tank analyst somewhere frantically updating their slide deck from strategic ambiguity to alphabetical enlightenment.
It really does have that effect. It disarms the question by effectively saying, your question is far too small for the complex reality that we are dealing with.
Okay, so we've seen the tactics. Let's get into the philosophy behind it all. Section 6, the philosophy of the fence. Now, this is a criticism India has faced for a long, long time, right? This idea of fence sitting.
Constantly. It goes all the way back to the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, and it's come up again much more recently with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The West, in particular, often accuses India of not picking a side. You're just sitting on the fence.
And that phrase carries a lot of negative weight. It implies indecision, maybe a bit of cowardice, a lack of moral clarity.
Right, like you're just waiting to see who wins before you place your bet.
So Jaishankar takes this metaphor, this attack, and he just completely flips it on its head.
He does. First, he argues that the fence is actually a comfortable place. It implies you're removed from the action, watching from a safe distance. And then he says, we are not sitting on the fence. We are sitting on the ground and stating its position.
Sitting on the ground. It's such a simple change of image, but it's so powerful.
It changes everything. A fence is precarious, unstable. The ground is stable, solid. The ground is where reality happens. So he's saying, we have a firm position. It just happens to be our position, not yours or theirs. We are grounded in our own national interest.
The source says the fence went from being the symbol of indecision to a luxury seat that was politely declined.
That's a great summary. And he pairs this idea with his defense of multi-alignment.
Yes, the smart defense.
Yeah.
This one is incredible.
He says, and this is a direct quote, if you are smart enough to have multiple options, you should be admiring me, not criticizing me.
That is an incredible amount of confidence. You should be admiring me.
It completely rebrands the entire concept. It's no longer non-alignment, which sounds passive and reactive. He presents it as active portfolio diversification.
Like a savvy investor.
Precisely. In finance, a good investor never puts all their money into one single stock. That's just foolish. He's asking, so in geopolitics, Why would you put all of your strategic capital with one single bloc or one single country? He frames India's independent foreign policy not as hesitation, but as high-level strategic intelligence.
You really have to have some swagger to pull that line off in a major international forum. You should be admiring me.
And he does! He seems to wear that confidence very comfortably.
All right, Section 7 gets a bit lighter, but the lines are just as sharp. This is aid, tourism, and secrets. Let's start with what the source calls the Sri Lanka burn.
Context here is really important. At the time, Sri Lanka was going through a absolutely massive economic crisis, total collapse. And India stepped in with huge amounts of aid. We're talking fuel, food, massive credit lines.
But of course, critics were questioning the motives, asking if this was some kind of debt trap diplomacy, or if India was trying to control Sri Lanka, acting like a regional big brother.
The usual cynical take. And Jaishankar's response to this line of questioning was, my first advice to you, the next time you want to take a holiday, go to Sri Lanka.
What a pivot. He goes from defending against accusations of imperialism to being a travel agent.
It's a travel recommendation that is wrapped in layers of geopolitical subtext.
The source boils it down to an equation. Aid plus tourism, solidarity with better beaches.
Solves. And it serves two brilliant purposes. First, it completely dismisses the sinister motive narrative as absurd. But second, and more importantly, it actually helps Sri Lanka. Their economy is hugely dependent on tourism. So by telling a global audience to go there, he's actively promoting their economic recovery while simultaneously shutting down the critic.
It's diplomatic multitasking.
It is the definition of benevolent shade.
And then we get the Hollywood moment.
Yeah.
This is the one that really does feel like it was lifted from a movie trailer.
The national security strategy question.
Right. Someone in the audience asks him to detail India's national security strategy.
Which is, of course, an absurd question. That involves highly classified information. You don't just read that out at a public Q&A.
And he smiles and says,
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
the oldest, most cliched line in the spy movie book.
But it's being delivered by a sitting foreign minister in a serious forum. The source says half the room burst out laughing, and the other half nervously checked to see if he was joking.
And the narrator's voice comes in. He was. Probably.
It's just so disarming. It brings a necessary human element into the room. It acknowledges the sheer absurdity of asking a foreign minister to reveal top state secrets in a public forum. Instead of a dry, bureaucratic answer like, that information is classified, he uses a pop culture reference that everyone understands. It connects.
Okay, so we've covered the individual hits. Now, the source material asks us to take part in a little thought experiment. This is Section 8, the satirical masterpiece.
A grand synthesis.
Right. The source wants us to visualize the ultimate global press conference. So I want you to just picture this scene with me.
I'm there. The lights in the hall dim. Leaders from Washington to Warsaw are present. The think tankers are in the front rows, armed with their footnotes and their hot takes. The air conditioning is humming with tension.
And Jaishankar walks onto the stage. No notes, just a faint smile, and what can only be described as quiet menace.
Let's play this out. I'll be the chorus of critics. You be the minister.
I am ready. Let's do it.
All right. A European representative stands up, nervously adjusting a tie. Minister, we are gravely concerned about the global implications of this ongoing conflict.
Europe has to get out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems.
A wave of silence. Then a Pakistani journalist rises. Sir, regarding the unfortunate situation of violence in the South Asian region.
You're asking the wrong minister. Please consult your own.
The UN official, red in the face, starts to get loud. We demand that the Council recognizes its responsibility to...
Keep your voice low.
Yeah.
You are a UN official, not a king.
A U.S. senator sighs dramatically. But, Minister, the future of democracy is fragile.
Do not worry, Senator. One democracy will settle it.
A pundit from a major newspaper stands. But, Minister, aren't you just sitting on the fence?
The fence is a comfortable place. We prefer to be on the ground.
Someone from the back whispers, and China.
Our relationship isn't normal.
But what's the plan beyond? Beyond the immediate issue.
And what is beyond A?
Finally, a desperate think tank analyst just pleads, what is the grand doctrine? What is the secret to your strategy?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
And the entire hall just dissolves into this mix of stunned laughter and grudging admiration.
And Twitter combusts. The internet breaks.
And somewhere, the authors of diplomacy textbooks are quietly updating their chapters on communication strategy to just include a picture of him and the caption, do this.
It's a funny image, but it really does highlight the incredible consistency of his style. It's not random. It's a barrage of clarity.
Which brings us perfectly to our last big section, section 9. Why does all of this work? Why is it so effective? The source calls him the meme lord of multilateralism.
That has to be a title no other foreign minister in history has ever held.
I think that's a safe bet. But the analysis here is really crucial. The source breaks down his rhetorical success into 3 core pillars. If you want to understand the Jaishankar method, you need to understand these 3 things.
Okay, what's pillar 1?
Pillar 1 is assert national interest unapologetically. He never apologizes for putting India's interests first. In a world where globalism often demands this kind of performative selflessness from developing nations, he is unapologetically nationalistic, but in a very rational, logical way.
He makes what others would call selfishness look like common sense responsibility.
That's it, exactly. Okay, pillar 2.
Expose double standards.
We saw this so clearly with the Europe and the oil comments. He is constantly shining a bright, uncomfortable light on the hypocrisy of the established powers. And this resonates so deeply with audiences across the global south. It's the classic "the emperor has no clothes" strategy deployed on a world stage.
And what's the third pillar? This one feels like the hardest to pull off.
It is. Pillar 3 is enter meme culture without losing gravitas. This is the high wire act. Usually when you see politicians trying to be memeable, it's just excruciatingly cringeworthy.
Oh yeah, the how do you do fellow kids moment.
Exactly that. But with Jaishankar, it works because the humor and the meme ability come from a place of pure intellect. He's not trying to be funny, he's just being incredibly sharp. The humor is a byproduct of the precision. He isn't chasing claps or likes, he's chasing clarity, and the clarity happens to be devastatingly effective.
The source uses another great term for his delivery style.
Yeah.
Controlled demolition.
Yes. I love that because he doesn't use a sledgehammer. He doesn't shout, he doesn't bluster. He uses a scalpel. And in a world that is just drowning in verbosity and endless rambling speeches, brevity is power.
A single, perfectly crafted sentence acts as a scalpel.
Think about it like a chess grandmaster who is always 5 moves ahead. He knows exactly where the question is going. He sees the trap being laid, and he cuts it off at the knees before it can even get started.
And he packages foreign policy. That's a huge part of it.
That's a fantastic way to put it. He's not just practicing foreign policy. He's marketing it. He is making the logic of Indian foreign policy accessible, memorable, and, most importantly in the modern age, shareable. He understands that a 30-second video clip is often more powerful than a 30-page white paper.
So as we start to wrap this up, what does this all mean for us? For you, the listener, what's the big picture here?
I think it means we're watching a fundamental shift in the language of power itself. It's no longer enough to just have the biggest economy or the most powerful army. You have to be able to control the narrative. And you control the narrative by being clearer, sharper, and faster than the other guy.
And maybe, just maybe, by being a little bit funny while you do it.
Wit is a sign of confidence. If you can afford to joke about a high-stakes situation, it signals to everyone that you aren't afraid of it. You're in control.
So as we conclude this deep dive into what the source calls the one-liner apocalypse, what is the final takeaway we should leave with?
I think it's the winning that our source material leaves us with.
And that is,
the next time global tensions spike, remember that somewhere in New Delhi, a diplomat is polishing a one-liner.
a one-liner sharp enough to require customs clearance. I just love that
I
metaphor.
feel like it's a dangerous good, hazardous material.
Exactly. Words have mass, they have velocity, they have impact.
And so the final piece of advice to the listener, borrowed directly from our source material.
Bow down, or at least keep your voice low.
I think keeping my voice low is the safer option.
A wise choice indeed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope you feel a little sharper, a little more on the ground, and maybe a little less on the fence.
Until next time.
See you then.